Hello everyone, my name is Brendan Snyder. Thank you so much for joining me and welcome to the top 10 best rock albums of the 70s. So with words like the best, the greatest of all time, these are all words used to describe the albums that we're going to be talking about here. And they're all albums that are career defining, genre setting, hugely influential and record breaking albums. We're going to get into all that in just a bit here, but before we do, if you're new to my channel and you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please click the button. Also leave a comment, hit like, all those things help support my channel. I would greatly appreciate it. And of course, as an added bonus, by subscribing, you'll be able to stay up to date on all that's going on in the world of music, just like this, with the top 10 best rock albums of the 70s. So there are so many great bands out there to be considered and albums and so forth, but there just unfortunately isn't enough room in a top 10 list to include them all. Case in point, I'm wearing a Queen shirt here and I did not include any Queen in this. Not that they're not great, just there aren't enough positions within this for that. But I want to kick this off with one honorable mention here, and it goes to The Who, Who's Next, and their 1971 album. It was their 5th studio album at the time, and it developed from the aborted Lifehouse project. The album itself uses synthesizers prominently throughout while moving away from the band's original sound, which was the mod influence, and then going on to a full rock album. It's kind of that big transition for them. And it features some amazing songs on here like Baba O'Reilly, which has one of the most iconic keyboard samples used in it, Behind Blue Eyes, which is such a beautiful ballad, and then Won't Get Fooled Again. It's just another iconic keyboard sampling that's on here with some big crashing guitars, making it the perfect way to end the album. All right, but now we're going to move into the top 10 best rock albums of the 70s, and kicking things off at number 10, Deep Purple, Machine Head, and their 1972 classic. It's their 6th studio album and has sold 2 million copies in the US. Everything seemed to really come together for the band on this one here. All 5 members, I think, are really in their element. The album features standout songs like Highway Star. It's got some really cool interplay between John Lord's keyboard and Ritchie Blackmore's guitar. I just think it's perfect the way they do that. Space Truckin'. This one here has a really cool spacey sounding groove to it. The opening keyboard riff on this one, along with the guitar riff, is excellent as well. Of course, when is it not with those two? And then we've got Smoke on the Water, which is probably one of the most overplayed guitar riffs period of all time, you know, but despite that, it's also one of the most classic riffs of all time. The way that this song builds, adding in one instrument after another to this thing, is why I think it's also one of the most classic rock songs ever. And the album itself has a true melding of some really great musicians on it, and all that wrapped together is why it comes in at the position that it does. All right, coming in at number 9, we've got the Rolling Stones' Some Girls from 1978, 16th studio album in the US. It's actually the 14th studio album in the UK. 6 million copies sold in the US, and it was influenced by dance and disco at the time. I think they merged those things well with this, along with their already use of soulful blues rock sound. This was also the first album to feature Ronnie Wood as a full-time guitarist. He had guested on some previous ones, but finally a full-time guitarist at this juncture. Features the songs Miss You, which has a really great driving bass from Bill Wyman on it, and also he helps to give it that disco influence. And I think it's one of the reasons I actually really like that song so much, is that melding of those two things. Then we've got Beast of Burden, a melodic rocker on here that's got a lot of soul and attitude to it, and Shattered. It's got a really heavy bottom end on it with some frenetic vocals, providing the song with lots of energy. Okay, coming in at number 8, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, Damn the Torpedoes from 1979. 3rd studio album, and has sold 3 million copies in the US. And it was a breakthrough album for the band at the time. You know, all of the energy that the band was waging with their record label at the time, they put into this album here, and it really comes across, creating 9 amazing rock pieces for one album. It features songs like Refugee, which has this really big rock opening to it. It falls back into a nice groove, before coming back really strong with the chorus. Here Comes My Girl. On this one here, I really like the cool spoken word verse on this thing before it kicks in with a beautiful chorus on it. And then Even the Losers. This one here was not a single at the time, but has gone on to become as big as any of their other songs. And I think just showing how great the album is that a song like that was not a single could still become such a hit in later day era of the band. Coming in at number 7, Steve Miller Band, Book of Dreams from 1977. 10th studio album from the band, 3 million copies sold in the US, and it was recorded at the same time as their previous album, Fly Like an Eagle from 1976, which just shows you how amazing and how many great songs could possibly come up with at one time if those two albums were actually done together. It continues the use of the spacey sounding keyboards that were evident on that first album, but it begins to move in some different musical styles with rock, blues, psychedelia, etc. And featuring the songs Jet Airliner, which was a cover of the Paul Pina song from 1973. But this one here is just a nice solid slab of poppy rock, and I think Steve does a great version of it here. Swingtown is a soaring rock song that builds at the beginning of this thing, and then it just cruises right along after doing that. And Jungle Love, which is a great driving rock song that really elevates during the chorus on this thing, I think just putting it over the top. Okay, coming in at number 6, we've got Boston, their debut 1976 album. 17 million copies sold in the US. If we were simply going off of numbers, this one here would probably be in the number 1 spot, but we're taking into account a lot of other things here as well. And this one here, in my opinion, is one of the finest recorded and produced albums ever. And what's actually amazing about it is it's actually the original demo that was recorded and then just enhanced in the studio, saying a lot about guitarist Tom Scholz, who I think is a musical genius, full-on proof by this debut album that's here. And he really used the layered effect to its best here, later to be used by other artists like Def Leppard. We'll talk about them in the next decade. But got some really stunning songs on this one. More Than a Feeling, beautiful intro here that soars into just one of the greatest 70s rock songs ever, in my opinion. Peace of Mind, perfect melding of the acoustic and electric instrumentation that's throughout on this album. Foreplay, A Long Time. The instrumental intro on this thing with the organ, I think, is to die for. And then it's just got a really huge drum sound that I also love on this thing. And the album itself is just one of the most powerful rock and AOR masterpieces out there, period. Okay, halfway there. Coming in at number 5 now. Aerosmith, Toys in the Attic, 1975, third studio album from the band. 8 million copies sold in the US alone, and it's just a straightforward, raw-sounding rock album. The band is so very tight on this thing here, with Joe Perry providing so many great guitar riffs, and then Steven Tyler countering with some real soul and depth in his vocals. Featuring the songs Toys in the Attic, the title track, just a big, dirty, hard-driving, riff-rocking song. You've also got Walk This Way on here, which is one of the most recognizable drum riffs by drummer Joey Kramer on here, and of course not to be outdone by Joe Perry, who provides a really classic guitar riff on that. And then you've got Sweet Emotion, such a big sounding song on this one here. I love how it builds at the beginning and kicks in with some really sweet harmonies by the band overall. And this one here, in my opinion, the album just has riffs for days and days and days, which is why it's ranking where it does. Okay, coming in at number 4, Led Zeppelin, Physical Graffiti from 1975, 6th studio album from the band. 16 million copies sold in the US. For this album here, the band wrote 8 brand new songs for it, but at the time it only amounted to 3 sides of the LP. So they added 7 previously unreleased songs to it to create a double album, which I think is really amazing that they would do that. Tour de force, just a lot of different styles on here. There's standard rock, hard rock, progressive rock, orchestral rock, and even folk mixed into this thing. In my opinion, the band was at their creative peak when doing this album here. Case in point by songs like The Rover, one of guitarist Jimmy Page's most underrated guitar lines. It was originally recorded for Houses of the Holy and then held back with added guitar parts in 1974. Kashmir. It's one of the most progressive pieces that they've ever done and has become a concert staple, or was a concert staple at the time, and is of course now one of their most iconic songs. And then Down by the Seaside, which is a Led Zeppelin 4 outtake. It's so beautiful, and the cool thing about it is it's, both very simplistic but also complex at the same time, which is an understatement for a band like this, that they could do something like that, showing what kind of a caliber they are, and at the same time what kind of a caliber this album in and of itself is. All right, coming in at number 3, Highway to Hell from 1979, fifth studio album from the band, 7 million copies sold in the US. Last to feature original vocalist Bon Scott before his passing. The album has the best production to date of that early era AC/DC material in my opinion, but every track on here is super solid, features all-time classics like the title track, Highway to Hell, Girls Got Rhythm, Shot Down in Flames. But for me at least, it's the deep album cuts on this thing that really show the album's strength, like Get It Hot and Night Prowler, one of my all-time favorite songs by AC/DC. And for me at least, it just shows that this album is solid from start to finish, and why this album here is all the rock you could really ever want from a band. Coming in at number 2, we've got Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon from 1973. 8th studio album from the band, 15 million copies sold in the US with an estimated sales of 45 million around the world. The studio and recording advancements alone on this album I think warrant its position, but it's also the longest running album on the Billboard 200 album chart, now clocking at 962 weeks. Funny thing is, the last time I talked about this album, it was at 957 weeks, so this thing just keeps adding weeks that it's been on the charts all the time. It's a very beautiful, dark, spiritual sounding album with a lot of outstanding guitar nuances by David Gilmour. This one here features some real stellar tracks like Time, a dark yet uplifting sound. It's got some of the best drumming by Nick Mason on it. Then we've got Great Gig in the Sky, a beautiful piece by keyboardist Rick Wright. And it's got some really amazing vocals that were just simply made up on the spot by the guest vocalist who sang it at the time. And then Money, which is just an utter classic. Who doesn't know that cha-ching that happens at the beginning of that, along with the classic bass line by Roger Waters. And this one here, quite possibly a perfect album if there ever was one. All right, but the number 1 rock album of the 70s is going to Van Halen and their self-titled album from 1978, debut album at that, has sold 10 million copies in the US. And while negatively received by the critics at the time, it now has gone on to become one of the greatest rock albums of all time. It's just also one of the biggest genre-shifting albums too that happened, leading to the explosion of 80s rock and later on glam metal. And with the 1 minute and 42-second instrumental the guitarist Eddie Van Halen does on here, Eruption, he simply redefines the guitar in that one song right then and there, which is now considered to be one of the greatest all-time guitar solos ever. The album itself, though, is filled with classics as well. You've got Running with the Devil on here, which has a great staccato bass line on it. Ain't Talking About Love, which is one of the most defining tracks in all of their catalog. So much so that Sammy Hagar, who didn't want to perform any of the David Lee Roth era material, even would perform this song here. And then You Really Got Me, which is a cover of a Kinks song, but I actually think Van Halen does a better version of it here, and in all showing what this band could do, which simply was anything they wanted to, and oftentimes much better than anyone else, and why this album here is the number 1 rock album of the 70s, at least in my opinion. All right, so there you go. That is the top 10 best rock albums of the 70s. And yes, it was very hard to narrow this thing down. I'm sure you've got your own opinions on this, and what should have been included, what shouldn't have been included, etc. So certainly let me know what you think should have been included, and we'll all have a nice chat about that. All right, everyone, take care, have a great day, and I'll talk to y'all real soon. Bye-bye, everyone.